Am I the a-hole for jumping out of the way when my niece and nephew tried to push me into a pool, resulting in them falling in? Happened today. My folks decided to host a barbecue because I guess that's what older people do. I declined because I really don't like my two sisters, their husbands, or their kids. Wife and I are child-free. Mom then pressured the wife. Long story short, we went. By the time we arrived, there were about 20 people there. My sisters and their husbands were already solidly buzzed. Drunk really. My mom was spending 100% of her time trying to keep the nieces and nephews, ages 7 to 11, more or less under control. My dad had strategically retreated to the whirlpool part of the pool with small cooler full of beers. Wife and I made small talk with miscellaneous people, ate food, and had a frozen margarita. Sisters/BILs took turns criticizing us for being late, not being in our swimsuits, and screwing up the vibe. Whatever. Typical suburban summer get-together. About 45 minutes and two of the kids ran at one of the neighbor guests who was standing next to the pool and pushed her in. She was at the pool steps, stumbled in but didn't fall, so only got half wet. She was clearly very unhappy about it, but she didn't make a scene. Just went over to where the parents were, grabbed their towels, dried herself off, and left. Sisters and BILs thought it was all great fun. A bit later, I was standing a few feet away from the pool chatting away with someone. I saw three of the kids running full tilt at me from the corner of my eye. Obviously, I was next. Not that it's terribly difficult to outwit young kids, but I just jumped out of their way at the last second. All three of them ran straight into the pool at full speed. Most of the other guests, including my wife and me, started laughing, but their moms, who as I mentioned were pretty shit-faced, absolutely freaked out. Apparently, two of the kids couldn't swim even though they were in swimsuits. Since I wasn't in swim gear, I stepped back from the pool and let other people fish the kids out. The kids were bawling their heads off like they lost a limb. At that point, all hell broke loose. The four drunk parents were yelling at everyone in general, and me in particular, for nearly letting their kids drown. And also because two of the kids had been videoing the trick using their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. One of my BILs got into the pool to try to retrieve the phones, but his BMI and BAC made that impossible. No one else volunteered to help, unsurprising given that my sisters were still bitching at everyone. I told my sisters it was their job to watch their kids, and that if anything had happened to them, it would have been their responsibility, not mine. There were some pretty strong words on both sides. Wife and I left after the other BIL fell over and face planted while yelling at us. Now they're saying I should have let the little shits knock me into the pool and have their fun and ruin my phone. So, am I the a-hole? Side note, Dad, of course, never got out of the whirlpool. Update post. Almost 1 month later. First off, my folks tell me that my nieces and nephews are all good swimmers and that they use the pool all the time. The 7-year-old is still a beginner, but he loves the water. My sister just said they couldn't swim, so I'd look bad. To be fair, none of the kids are allowed in the deep end, which is where they fell in. It was the two 10-year-olds and the 9-year-old who tried to push me into the pool. After we left, the party ended on a pretty sour note. My drunk brother-in-law, who face-planted while yelling at me, had to go to an urgent care place and get his face stitched up. He was too toasted to drive, so Dad took him. Dad was very not happy about this. Late that evening, my sisters started a group text and said some really nasty crap. Their husbands threw in a few comments as well. Wife and I blocked the four of them. My mom called me. She was pretty upset about what they said. She and Dad were in the chat, and I don't blame her. Because of the texts, my folks insisted my sisters/BILs come over the next day, Sunday, without their kids to get some things straight and lay down some ground rules, Mom's wording. The result was a contrite, if unenthusiastic, apology from the siblings via my mom's phone. I'm glad my wife was with me when they called. Her hard stares kept me from saying what I wanted to. I just told them thanks and that we felt no need to discuss it further. Since I thought things were settled, I unblocked them. That evening, I got a text from one of the BILs telling me the phones cost $XXX and asking when I'd be paying for them. WTF? I replied, never, took a screenshot of his text and forwarded it to my folks with a note that we were done with this nonsense. We're going no contact with sisters/spouses and not to invite us to any more holidays or get-togethers if they'll be present. Then I blocked the sisters and their spouses again. At that point, the shit really hit the fan. Dad called them and ripped them a new one. Among other things, he told them the grandkids were not welcome at his place indefinitely, since my mom regularly provides free babysitting that got them pretty rattled. He also banned them from using the vacation house and told them my wife and I actually own it, not he and Mom. This completely freaked them out. Both of my sisters/families use the place a lot, including having their friends up for weekend getaways. This was very much out of character for my folks. They clearly had it. And for reference, I never wanted my sisters to know we owned the place. We bought it for my folks. They'd always wanted a place in the mountains. Keeping the ownership quiet was just a way to avoid drama with my siblings. A couple of days later, my sisters and their husbands came to our place unannounced to apologize in person. We were out to dinner, and they left a note. One sister also called me at work too. I sent her to voicemail. We've decided being no contact is the best thing for the indefinite future and haven't interacted with them for the last 3+ weeks. Personally, I'm done. They can go pound sand. Update 2 post. 9 days from previous post. Well, it's been an interesting last few days. I thought the shit had hit the fan before, but it was more of a fart compared to what's happened this week. For this to make sense, I need to provide some financial context. My folks haven't ever been any good at saving money. I've been doing their taxes for years, so I know pretty much everything about them money-wise. Their house is paid for, and they have minimal debt, but they didn't save much for retirement. Both of them get Social Security. Dad gets a solid pension, and they have a bit of savings, but there's no treasure chest in the basement. I bought their current car for them after they retired, a retirement present, so they could have something nice to drive. It was the first car in probably 20 years they didn't lease. My sisters are convinced the folks are dripping with money and that our parents will be leaving the two of them everything since I don't need more money, so they've never cared about saving either. Turns out my oldest sister and her husband, they have 3 kids, have been living beyond their means for some time and are in financial straits. They've maxed out their credit cards and are behind on their car leases to the point that one is about to get repossessed. He'd bragged in the past about making X per year, but it turns out to be about half that. She confessed all this to Mom on Tuesday because they need a loan and this was a WTF moment for Mom and Dad, that for the last 3 years, instead of staying at the vacation house regularly, she's actually been renting it out once a month or so and pocketing the cash. We're talking $2,000 plus for a weekend and at least $4,000 for a week. With her being cut off from using the place, she's had to cancel one group already. She's now worried they'll lose everything. My folks aren't in any position to give them a loan. My other sister was aware of her renting out the place, but of course hasn't ever said anything. I suspect she's done the same thing as well because I went up there once to drop off an ATV I'd had worked on, and there was a family there who claimed to be staying there with my sister/her family and that they'd gone to town for something. At the time I let it go, I figured she'd loaned out the house to some friends, but I've always wondered. I found all this out through my folks who are pretty stressed out about it. Mom more than Dad. He's mainly just pissed off about it all. I know Dad feels betrayed, and I imagine he's embarrassed that he's in no position to help his daughter out. He did reiterate that as long as it's up to him, the girls won't be using the vacation home anytime soon. My folks let me know what's going on because they figured my sisters would put a full court press on me next. And they were right. On Thursday, my sisters came to our place again, without husbands this time, and waited outside the door until I got home. I had to choose between fighting with them in public, them making a scene if I went in without them, or letting them in, so I let them in. I got a bullshit story from the older sister with the younger one backing her up regarding why I needed to let them use the mountain place again immediately. They also said I've been a shitty brother and that I needed to step up and plan on paying for their kids' college tuition since that's what family does. I let them pitch their story, then called them out based on what my folks had told me. Things went as shit from there. There was denial, crying, cursing, yelling, you name it. I swear my ears are still ringing 2 days later. Won't lie, I said some really mean and shitty things to them, but nothing that wasn't true. They finally left after about an hour. After that, I took a shower and laid down. When I got up, my wife was home, and her first words were that she'd had to block more phone numbers because my sisters were blowing up our phones from new ones. Folks messaged me yesterday asking me to call. I'm sure my sisters have told them some bullshit version of what happened, but I'm not up to rehashing it yet. I'm usually a pretty energetic person, but this drama has me beaten down. I had just enough energy today to drive up to the vacation house and padlock the entrance gate shut. I'm the only one with a key. I'm guessing that will be enough to ensure my siblings leave the place alone. They'd probably die trying to walk 400 yards uphill to get to the house. Update 3 post. 2.5 weeks from last update. Yet another update regarding the cluster F that is my extended family. Thought it might be time given what's gone on over the past 2 weeks. After my sisters came to my place, my mom and Dad told me they were done with managing the vacation home. Sounded like the sisters had been pressuring them to let them use the place again. Basically, my folks handed the responsibility for place over to me and told me it was my problem from here on out. Up until then, they'd kept track of who would be using it when, and they'd taken care of routine maintenance, replacing worn-out items, etc. In any case, they decided they didn't want to be in the middle of all this crap. While I don't blame them, I'm disappointed because the damn place was supposed to be something for them to enjoy and hang out in, and they use it regularly. Plus, I've never cared that they let my sisters and their families use it, because really I've always thought that was my parents' call even though I technically own it. But now my folks are going to be in the position of not having access without me being involved. and that changes the whole dynamic of the place. I've taken several steps to secure the place. I already mentioned that I locked the gate. It has a heavy-duty chain and the best lock I could find. I also did a full reset on all the door keypads and created all new codes. Security cameras got installed yesterday, which is actually pretty cool because the installer convinced me to put a high residential one that looks out over the valley. The system cost me way more than I thought it would, but the peace of mind is worth it. The installer also put up signs on the property saying the place was monitored by video. I also installed a heavy-duty lockout for the water shutoff/drain valve. I hope to hell I don't lose the keys for it, because if I do, it's going to be a bear to try to remove. Haven't told anyone but my wife that the water is locked off and again. Only we have the keys. Last week, I got separate calls at my office from both of the husbands trying to convince me to let them use the house, like they always have. The older one had gone up with some friends for a guy's hangout, but couldn't get in because of the gate lock. He was pretty pissed and embarrassed about being locked out. I'm sure he would have broken the lock if he could have. During his call, he kept bouncing between pushy and victimhood. At one point, he threatened to rip that gate out of the goddamn ground. He also admitted they'd been renting it out to a few friends, that they needed the money, I was ruining their business, and that I should refund their guests' money. Me? F that. I should have recorded the conversation with him, but I don't know how to do that from an office phone anyway. The other BIL just sounded like he was being made to call by my sister. He didn't really put up a fight when I told him not to plan on ever using the place again. In any case, I told them they can't use the place and not to ask again. At this point, I'm considering selling the vacation home. Wife and I won't use it enough to justify keeping it, and it's not like there's going to be any family get-togethers there anytime soon. I mentioned selling it to my folks. Their response was pretty much, whatever. I'd more than double my money by selling it. The place consists of 3 lots with killer views and is at the end of a private road. But I'll probably wait for a while to sell. Doing so now would be an emotional decision. My sisters and I aren't currently speaking, and I have no plans to initiate contact. I don't know what the status between them and my folks is, and I don't want to. On the upside, we spent an evening with my folks last week, went to a new restaurant that was nice. No one brought up any of this crap. Mom did update us on the nieces and nephews. She's spending time with them at their homes. Sorry this update isn't full of laughs or owns. That's just life sometimes. Update post 4, 1 month later. A couple of people have asked for an update. Here you go. I hired a guy to manage/look over the vacation home. He lives in the area, takes care of his folks, and manages a good number of properties. Some are vacation rentals, some are weekend places like ours. He has access to my camera feeds and does a physical check on the place every week or 2. I think he may have the best job in the mountains. He gets paid to drive around with his dog, walk around the properties, and hangs out on people's decks whenever he feels like it. He also has a camera feed from a house near the start of the private road that takes still shots whenever a vehicle goes past it. $450 per month, plus he'll do basic maintenance and repairs on an hourly basis. He's friends with all of the sheriff's deputies too. Got a lot of peace of mind from doing this. And he sends photos from his walks to everyone once or twice a week. I have to brag a bit on my parents. I got all this from them tonight at dinner. They were getting pressure from my sisters to demand that I open up the vacation house to everyone for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving up there had become quite the tradition for the family, not for me or my wife. We've gone once in 7 years. My dad refused to bother me about it because he knew I'd say no. They came up with what I think is a great plan. Announced that they were organizing the Thanksgiving gathering, and if everyone split the cost in advance, they'd rent an Airbnb in the mountains. Otherwise, they'd host Thanksgiving at their place, or one of the sisters could host it. This caused a fight between the sisters because the middle sister was all for doing the Airbnb, but the oldest one doesn't have any money. The deadline to commit to the Airbnb has passed. Looks like Thanksgiving will be at my parents' place. Regardless, we won't be there. My parents have asked that we not sell the place for now. They decided they'd still like to use it occasionally, but not until my sisters have come to terms with the new normal. And of course, they'd probably like it if everyone could get together there again down the road. But that's just not going to happen. I'd just as soon sell it and move on at this point, but I can live with keeping it if my folks do use it now and again. Plus, it will be worth even more down the road. Wife and I have stayed no contact with my sisters and their husbands. Both sisters have called from new numbers, Nephew Google Voice, and left messages insisting that I meet with them, for our parents' sake, to work out how everyone can use the family vacation home. They called my wife too. I'm glad I was already in the habit of not answering calls if I don't recognize the number. I honestly don't know if they're delusional, or if they think they can bully me into giving them access again. Don't really care. My parents tell me that the oldest sister and her husband are getting out of the leases for their SUV and big-ass truck and are selling their jet skis and some other shit they've never needed. That's going to be really hard on her. She's quite the braggart and won't like being seen in something older/smaller/cheaper. My BIL's identity is very much wrapped up with his truck as well. He even has a small tattoo of the truck company's logo, which frankly is one of the many reasons why he and I never hung out. Several people have suggested I make the vacation home into an Airbnb. I don't plan to do so, at least anytime soon. I know it would make money, but it would cause an incredible amount of drama across the family and would stress out my parents. They don't need that. It would also be a hassle to remove personal things my folks have there. That stuff has nowhere to go. And there would be wear and tear on the place. And I'm sure it would take some amount of time on my part, even though I'd use a manager to do it. Just not worth it to me. Update post 5, 1.5 months later. Wrote most of this yesterday, but decided to wait to post it until I wasn't so wound up. Waiting didn't work. I'm still wound up. Sorry if this rambles. So much has happened. Hard to write coherently. Things have gone to hell. I really, truly did not think anything like this would happen. Short version. My brothers-in-law broke into my vacation home and were arrested. They've been charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property and communicating threats, all Class 1 misdemeanors. I've refused to drop the charges. I might do so if I'm fully paid for the damage they caused. They were still in jail as of Saturday evening. I assume they're out by now. Things had settled down, at least I thought so. Haven't seen or heard from my sisters in over 6 weeks. My parents went up to the house for a week and had a good time. David, the property manager I hired, has worked out great. He's done a couple of repairs I asked him to do, and I've given him a list that he's going to work on. He usually sends a photo or two of wildlife or a sunset to his clients every week. Was kind of making me want to get up there. Friday after Thanksgiving, my BILs went to my vacation home. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the driveway gate and damaged the gate in the process. They tried to get in through the front door, ruined the lock set, and gouged the door badly. They finally got in through the utility floor door and a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn. I'm not sure why. When they went out through the front door, where they were met by sheriff's deputies and David. David gets notifications from the camera system when there's activity. He saw what was going on and called the sheriff's department. According to David, the BILs tried to bullshit their way out of it, but the deputies didn't buy it. Breaking into an empty house is a pretty serious thing up there. Usually it's meth heads who ransack the place and hawk everything. When the BILs were arrested, they freaked out big time. Were saying how they were going to beat the hell out of me, etc. Not smart to do in front of cops. David and the sheriff's office tried calling my wife and me to see what we wanted to do, but we were spending the day with her parents and had left our phones in the car so we could be in vacation mode. So they booked the BILs on everything, which is what I would have asked them to do anyway. BILs called their wives from jail, who of course freaked out. They called my folks, tried to call me, they're blocked. Tried to find a lawyer up there to arrange bail. Not easy to do given that it's a rural area and was a holiday weekend. Older sister has zero cash and her cards are maxed out, so if they made bail, my middle sister would have had to pay for both husbands. I know they were still in jail as of Saturday afternoon. We didn't check our phones until late Friday on the way home from the in-laws. There were a ton of calls and messages from my mom, dad, David, and the sheriff's department. Talk about ruining a great day. I was in such a good mood till I looked at my phone. My wife read through the texts and listened to messages, read them out to me, and by the time we got home I had some idea of what was going on. I put my brain back into thinking mode, tried to get past my anger, failed. Called David and got the rundown on what had happened and how bad the damage was, resulting in more anger. I ended Friday by calling the sheriff's department and telling them there was no misunderstanding. The BILs had absolutely no right to be on my property and I wanted to press charges. I didn't call my folks back. Barely slept. I waited until Saturday afternoon to call my folks. They were both pretty rattled about it all, my mom in particular. My sisters had browbeat them into telling me I should tell the cops it was all a mistake and that I wanted the charges dropped. I refused flat out, told them there was no way I'd do that until I spoke with an attorney, and also not until I was paid in full for whatever it will cost to fix everything 100%. My mom was crying hard by the time we got off the phone, which of course made me feel like shit. My dad suggested it was time for a complete start over, but also said he thought they needed to pay for the damage. I haven't gone up to the property yet. There's nothing I can do, and I'll probably go nuts when I see the damage in person. The photos are bad enough. I'm hoping to tomorrow or Wednesday, but my job isn't one I can just wander off from for non-emergencies. I've left messages with 2 attorney friends asking them to recommend the right lawyers to go after my sisters and BILs. I don't know what I can do exactly, but I'm hoping to get restraining orders. I have all the texts they've sent me that might help. I'm strongly considering suing them for the money they made renting the place. I don't care about the cash, but it will help make them as miserable as possible. The gloves are definitely off at this point. A couple of side notes. BILs had no idea I'd hired someone to keep an eye on things, or that there are cameras there now. My parents knew but hadn't told them because they knew it would just give my sisters a reason to drama up. There are signs on the property stating it's being monitored with cameras and no trespassing signs though. My wife has completely had it at this point. I don't blame her. She's been more than patient about it all, but she reached her limit and was not shy about letting me know. She told me it's up to me how I deal with this, but that she thought they all needed to be taught a hard lesson. Older BIL likely won't face any repercussions at his job over this, but middle BIL has a security clearance, so he might. I'm hoping that will be motivation for middle BIL to pay for the damages himself immediately. David, the caretaker, has an interesting background. I knew he was friends with some of the deputies, figured it was because they were all locals. I was wrong. He was a cop in a big city for years, was shot on duty and afterwards decided to quit and move to where his parents had retired. He has some PTSD over it all. His dog is a certified service animal and is usually with him. I know law enforcement people tend to hang together. I guess that's how they became his friend group. I don't want to see or speak with these aholies for the rest of my life. I know this is in direct conflict with my overwhelming urge to make their lives as miserable as possible. Update post 6, 5 days later. Didn't think I'd be doing another post this soon, but a lot has happened over the past 2 days. Short version. I think the corner has been turned on this crap. Thursday afternoon I got a courier-delivered envelope at my office. In it was a signed letter from both my brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. In the letter they made what I have to say was a really sincere apology. Among other things, they acknowledged breaking in, acknowledged it was wrong, said the $5,000 was to pay for the damage and that they'd pay more if it cost more than that. Also said they'd stay away from the vacation home unless my wife and I specifically invited them. They also asked that I do what could to get the charges dropped as soon as possible because they both could lose their jobs and that they'd agree to a restraining order or whatever else it took for that to happen. There was more as well, all conciliatory, but that's the gist of it. To say this was a shock is an understatement. It was, obviously, a total 180 from their past behavior. I'd already made an appointment with an attorney to see about suing my BILs over the damage and to try to get a restraining order. I called him and told him what I just received, and he agreed to meet with me at the end of the day instead of next week. Told me not to deposit the check. We met for about 2 hours. He ended up recommending the wife and I do a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them, sisters and BILs. He said if we went after them via a lawsuit that we'd almost certainly win, but that it could take 2 years or more. There would be sizable upfront legal fees and that we might never see any money. He also said we could keep the $5,000 free and clear even if we didn't let them off the hook. He's drawing up the agreement. It won't be ready until Monday. The agreement will include what's essentially the civil equivalent of a restraining order. I'd already asked my property manager to work up a bid to get the damage repaired. I called him after the meeting and asked that he get me as close an estimate as possible ASAP. Got that Friday. He thinks it will take around $4,000 to fix everything. Most of that is for the front door. On Friday, my attorney contacted each of the BILs, told them what we were proposing, and advised them to get their own lawyers. They both agreed to it. The middle BIL told him they could afford to either pay for the damages or pay for a lawyer, but not both, and they figured a lawyer wouldn't make any difference given that they really had no defense for what they did. His biggest concern was if the charges could be dropped. From what I can tell, they're willing to do anything/sign anything to make this all go away. My attorney also called the DA's office on Friday to discuss dismissing the charges, got the name of the prosecutor and left them a message, but has not spoken to them yet. He thinks they'll dismiss the charges because the BILs are paying up and they have no priors. But then again, he's not a criminal lawyer. Also said I should be prepared to drive up there Monday or Tuesday and tell the prosecutor in person that I want everything dismissed. He's also advised me to continue to be no contact with sisters and BILs, especially for the next 6 months, and that it will be really important to follow the terms of the agreement when it comes to future interactions with them. I'm guessing that the BIL's change of heart is due to them having figured out what's at stake for them, what it's going to cost them in legal fees and fines and so on. There's also the highly unlikely possibility that they could go to jail for up to 120 days, and as I've mentioned, one of them has a security clearance for his job that could be at risk. So this is their Hail Mary pass to keep their normal lives. This isn't a perfect resolution to the situation, but at least it will get me past the legal and financial parts of the shit show that I've been in for the past few months. I doubt I'll ever have a civil relationship with any of them ever again, and that's fine. What I want most at this point is to close this off, get on with my life, and never speak to any of them again. I'm exhausted from this. Wife feels pretty much the same way. Kind of a side issue, but getting the written apology was, weirdly, a huge moment for me. I wasn't expecting that ever, but apparently it matters to me quite a bit. The money doesn't feel particularly important at this moment. I'll damn sure take it though. Also, I'm pretty certain my middle sister and her husband came up with the money. The cashier's check is from the credit union of the company he works for. Once things are signed, I plan to make one more update, probably just an edit to this post. I'm sorry for being so pedantic. Writing these posts has helped clear my head, and the feedback has really helped. I truly appreciate everyone's comments, insights, and support. And I really, really hope none of you ever have to go this kind of nonsense. Update post 7. 5 days later. Tuesday morning, I met with my attorney, went over the agreement. Changed a couple of minor things, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. It included a requirement that they pay my attorney's fee, about $3,000. They weren't happy about that and tried to negotiate it away, but he told them they either accept it as is or there would be no deal at all, and we'd proceed with suing them for the money they got from renting out the place, wear and tear from renting it, repair costs from their break-in, emotional distress, lost income from having to deal with this, attorney fees, and whatever else we could. He also told them I would push hard with the DA's office to prosecute every charge. Short version, they came in and signed. I wasn't there. I'm told it was a pretty tense environment, that the middle BIL appeared to have taken charge, and that at one point he told both of my sisters to shut the hell up, or he was walking away from the whole thing, making his own deal with us and the rest of them could all go to hell. They provided another cashier's check for $2,500, claimed that's all they had. It's close enough that we're going to accept it as the final payment. Attorney also told me that everyone was very cold and curt towards one another, but that they all managed to keep it together long enough to sign and left without making too big of a scene. I drove up to the vacation house early yesterday to check out the damage and meet with the DA's office. Seeing the damage made my blood boil. It was so senseless. I was so pissed that I was ready to eat the cost of repairs and do everything I could to ruin their lives. Tried walking it off, failed utterly. Ended up calling a good friend who was kind enough to stay on the phone for over an hour letting me spew and vent. He eventually got me back to focusing on the bigger picture of putting this behind me and getting on with my life. Honestly, I'm still not sure that's what I want to do, but I settled down enough to get some food in me, and I felt better. After lunch, I went to DA's office. Hadn't made an appointment and had to wait a while, but got to meet with the assistant DA who's got the case. Short version is that since I don't want to prosecute and the BILs have already paid for the damages, that they are willing to drop all the charges except trespassing, which in this case will be a Class 2 misdemeanor. The BILs will have to plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge sets. I'm also told that if they fight the trespassing charge or ever so much as fart in public up there, that it would go very poorly for them. It helped that the BILs didn't resist arrest. If they had, none of the charges would have been dropped. I also went by the sheriff's office to thank them for getting there so quickly and everything. Wanted to thank the deputies personally, but only spoke to the dispatch person. And I tried to meet up with David, the property manager, but couldn't get hold of him. A couple of notes. The agreement includes a no-contact clause. Basically, if any of them show up where my wife or I are, or the other way around, whoever got there last has to leave immediately. No contact except through attorneys or other, mutually agreed upon third parties. They get to keep whatever they made from renting the vacation house, my big give. Unless I have tax consequences which they will be responsible for. And we release each other from all other liabilities up through the present. There's more to it than that, but those are the high points. Wife and I will sign the agreement later today. After that, I can't talk about most of this, but I can talk around it. I think this is my final update regarding all this nonsense, but I'll respond to comments if I can. As I've said before, posting about all of this and reading folks' thoughts and responses has been really helpful and has probably been key in my being able to handle this in a relatively healthy way. So thank you all again. Update post 8. 3.5 months later, 8 months from OG post. Title: Oldest sister and BIL have filed for bankruptcy. Thought it would be worth an update for anyone who's interested. Unsurprisingly, my oldest sister and brother-in-law have filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. While I don't care about what happens to them financially or otherwise, they've also managed to drag my parents into their mess, which I'm not happy about. At the start of the year, my BIL's oversized, customized Pride and Joy truck was repossessed. Pretty embarrassing for him, I'm sure. Happened at work. This was their breaking point. Without the truck, they have to share a Kia my parents loaned them, and they can barely fit in it with their 3 kids. Financially, they're FD. They owe at least $125,000, probably more, on high-interest credit cards. They have 0 equity in their house, and have a couple of personal loans that I'm pretty certain they got under false pretenses. They have loans on their jet skis, ATVs, and trailers. They also owe a chunk of money from defaulting on the truck lease. They hadn't made any payments on their credit cards or loans in months, and were behind on their house payments as well. They got out of the lease on my sister's massive SUV late last year. They were upside down on it as well, so had to come up with cash to do so. They also had to pay an attorney, the fine and court cost for my BIL's trespassing charge at the vacation house. And they owe my middle sister and her husband money for bail and their portion of the damages to the place. As I've mentioned before, my folks have never been financial wizards, but they have at least been generally responsible. They're retired, their home is paid off, and they live off of Social Security and pensions. Altogether, they get more than they spend. Minimal savings, just an emergency fund. Turns out my folks emptied out that fund, cashed out their small IRA, $20K, and gave it to my sister. That let her catch up on the house payment and cover the negative equity on her car lease. But now literally every bit of savings my parents possessed is gone. Plus, my parents have been paying for their groceries for several months and continue to pay the insurance on the car they loaned my sister. According to my dad, my sisters worked my mom for weeks to get her to fork over the money. They'd worked on both my folks at the same time for a while, but my dad flat out refused every time. Eventually, mom caved. She was worried that my sister would have to move to a hovel in some backwater town and that the kids would be barefoot and eating dirt. Dad's not happy about it, and to say there's some tension between them right now is an understatement. But they'll be fine. I was pretty disappointed when my parents told me all this, but I wasn't surprised. It sucks that they emptied out their savings to help, but I kind of get it. The way the bankruptcy laws are in our state, by getting caught up on the home loan, my sister should be able to keep the house. I tried hard not to say how I felt about this, and my sisters mostly succeeded. Really, I'm way more pissed about this than I should be. The worst part for me is that my sister and BIL could now contact me and my wife without any real fear of repercussions. The only penalty the no-contact agreement has is that if they violate it, we can go after them for the money they made from renting out the vacation house and related damages. Since they've filed for bankruptcy, that's now not an impediment for them. I'm hoping they'll leave us alone, but who knows? Folks also told me that my middle sister and her husband have hit a rough spot, and that he's not currently living with her and the kids. Just a guess, but I imagine he's had it with the whole family dynamic that caused this nonsense. Not directly related, but on a brighter note, I've spent 2 weekends at the mountain house since the start of the year, once with my wife and once alone. Both times there was a lot of snow. It was incredibly beautiful and relaxing, very therapeutic. The place also has good internet service now, thanks Starlink, which is nice. Plus, knowing that I can count on David, the property manager, to keep the place in shape/ready for us to visit and to help if we get snowed in eliminates most of the stress in owning it. My folks have used it a few times as well and get along great with David. Relevant comments. Could you get a restraining order? If they start up again, I do indeed plan to get a restraining order. In fact, my wife made it clear to me she expects a very hard approach to any BS from them going forward, which I agree with, of course. I had the security cameras at our house upgraded at the start of the year just in case they come by. I also kept all their previous texts and provided screenshots to my attorney for safekeeping. If they cause any trouble at the vacation house, they're toast. The sheriff's department and DA's office have the full story and are sympathetic to our situation. $125,000 on credit cards? $125,000 is my estimate based on my sister telling my parents they were racking up at least $3,000 per month just in credit card interest. She thought it might be more. Their credit was already crap before the bankruptcy, so I'm guessing they might be paying as high as 28% interest. If so, they'd owe about $125,000. If they're paying a lower interest rate, the principal would be higher. But yeah, it's an absurd amount. And that $3,000 doesn't include all the other interest they're paying. And of course, there's the principal that just sits there. On the other hand, I'm told they had a great time going to Disney World for a week, so there's that. Middle BIL. Younger BIL seems to be more decent than I've given him credit for in the past. I'll admit to a bit of myopia. For years, I've seen the 4 of them and their kids as just one mass of inconvenient people I have nothing in common with but can't avoid. But he seems to have hit his limit and made some changes. Hope it works out for him, and that he pulls my sister in the right direction. How sisters got so entitled. My sisters and I weren't raised to be like they are. When I was young, they weren't any more self-entitled than any other teenagers. We all worked crappy teenage jobs, didn't get spoiled. It was really a very standard suburban upbringing. We weren't super close, but we weren't enemies. Somewhere along the line after going off to college, they changed for the worse. I guess it could be worse. They could have become drug addicts or militant vegan volcano worshippers or whatever. But they sure became people I don't want to be around. And yes, the pool incident was the spark for the meltdown, but the fuel had been accumulating for years. It would have come out at some point that she was renting the house out on the sly, and things would have gone to hell then just like they did now. Update post 9. 4 months later, almost 1 year from OG post. There's been a fair number of requests for an update, And considering it's coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the pool incident, I thought I'd post one. My folks worked through Mom giving my oldest sister her IRA and their emergency fund. Altogether, Mom gave her $45,000. According to Dad, once Mom realized how much she'd been manipulated, she got as mad and upset as he'd ever seen her. I think she had a moment of clarity. She and Dad ended up calling my sisters on a 3-way call, and according to Dad, it went south pretty quickly. Sisters were gaslighting them. Mom lost her cool and ended up ripping into them hard. There were lots of tears, and eventually both sisters hung up. Mom really just wanted both sisters to acknowledge that they'd put her and Dad in a risky financial situation. Typical blow-up, I guess, but not the kind of thing that happens in our family. The next morning, my dad called my older sister and told her he'd be picking up the car they'd loaned her. She tried to argue, but he told her it wasn't up for discussion. He got a neighbor friend to take him to her house as soon as he hung up and drove it home without talking to her. Sister called and went off on him, said lots of nasty stuff, which of course hurt him, but at least they have the car back. Dad also told me something that left me dumbfounded. For the last 17 years, they were giving both sisters a grocery allowance that was up to $500 per month. What the fing F? I thought I had a pretty good handle on where their money was going, but clearly I was wrong. This started back when I was going to grad school and living at home. My sisters asked for the money because they thought it wasn't fair that I was living at home rent-free, and then it just never ended. In any case, my parents cut them off. Unsurprisingly, my sisters weren't happy about it. Who the hell gets an allowance from their parents when they're in their 40s? Because of all this, my folks and sisters quit talking for a while. Don't know if they've resolved everything, but they appear to be on speaking terms again, though my folks aren't having them or the kids over. I'm in don't ask mode. It's their business. My folks are using the vacation home fairly regularly. Currently, they're there for a 2-week stay, and will probably make it 3. Unfortunately, my wife and I haven't spent any time there lately other than me having made a couple of day trips to check on it and drop off some supplies. The property manager I hired, David, is still taking good care of the place. Side note, middle sister told my mom that the oldest sister had been making over $6,000 per month renting the house out, and that it had been going on for nearly 3 years. Pretty certain she didn't declare the income, so that's like grossing $8,000 to $9,000 per month. I will forever find that galling. Oldest sister and BIL still have their house. My attorney checked up on their bankruptcy case. The court converted it from Chapter 7 to Chapter 13, which I believe means they have to pay back a lot more of their debts. Middle sister and her husband are still separated. I don't know if my middle BIL has had any issues with his security clearance because of breaking into the house. I do know he's still with the same big defense company. At my parents' request, I've been working on putting their house into a trust. They want me to manage their affairs as they get older and keep the house safe for my sisters. I'm working with an attorney, but it's not done yet. Folks have asked me to be the trustee and have also given me full power of attorney. The best part about the last few months is that my sisters/BILs have left us alone and have stayed away from the vacation home. Wife and I are really happy to be back to our normal lives. Hope everyone else's lives are going great. Update post 10. 5 months later, 1 year and 5 months from OG post. Some folks have asked for an update. Here you go. In August, my attorney let me know he'd received a letter from me from my middle brother-in-law. This was the first contact from any of my sisters or their husbands since they'd been arrested. It was a long letter, had a sincere apology, and a lot of information he thought I should know. Biggest thing was that he and my sister are divorced, not separated. He moved out and filed for divorce right after we made the settlement agreement. He and my middle sister kept it quiet until it was done. Their house sold in June, and she's moved to an apartment. He told me that his being arrested last year, along with my other BIL, for breaking into the vacation house could have cost him his job and killed his career, and that it was a huge moment of clarity. He said that the dynamic between the 4 of them, my sisters, him, and my oldest sister's husband, had become totally toxic, that they are all borderline alcoholics or worse, and that he had to get away from that environment. He no longer speaks to my oldest sister or her husband. He also asked if he, my dad, and I could meet and have an extended conversation, as there were things he needed to talk about in person. Frankly, I was unenthused, but my wife thought it was worth doing. I asked my dad if he was interested. He was. So I relayed a response to now ex-BIL through my attorney, and we met over lunch. We talked for over 2 hours. It was pretty exhausting. Ex-BIL looked better than I'd seen him in, well, forever. He's quit drinking, is in therapy, has lost a lot of weight, and looked fit. He was apologetic about all the BS he'd been involved in and apologized to my dad for hiding the divorce. Told us therapy is really helping him. Asked me if the $5,000 he'd sent covered all the damage to the vacation house. I told him it had, and thanked me for talking to the county prosecutor. Said he is strongly considering transferring to a new project that would have him living overseas for the next few years, that he really needed to reset his life, but he was trying to balance his mental health against not being part of his kids' lives every day. XBIL also hit us with what for me was quite the WTF. Apparently my sisters have hated me since before I was born, but have always hidden it from the rest of us. They liked things better when there were just the two of them. He said when they drank, which was whenever they were together, my sisters would often bitch about me being the favorite child, how my folks gave me more opportunities than they had, how my doing well was a result of that, and that I didn't deserve my success. None of that made any sense to me or my dad. All three of us went to the same public schools, had dumb part-time jobs, etc. My folks paid for 100% of their college, not mine. I got a full scholarship. I was pretty shocked by this, but my dad was literally speechless. Dad eventually said he had no clue they felt that way as kids, and that he and Mom had never favored any of us. He's still having a hard time with this. Personally, I'm embarrassed that I was clueless about it all my life, but it does explain a lot. XBIL warned us that my sisters and remaining BIL intended to put on a full court press to alienate my folks from my wife and me. They also plan to keep the grandkids away from my folks to pressure them. He said that they're still 1000% convinced that my folks are sitting on a ton of money. They want some of it ASAP and are sure I'd stop my folks from giving them anything. That got a laugh out of my dad because he and Mom simply don't have any real money. They do have their house, of course. XBIL also told us that he and my middle sister had rented out the vacation house a total of 6 times over the years. He offered to pay me what they'd made. I declined and told him it was in the past. He also told us my older sister/BIL had never declared the income from renting out the vacation house. He didn't want to get in trouble with the IRS. Both my dad and I spoke with XBIL separately for a few minutes. Don't know what they talked about. I thanked him for his apology and for making things right financially. Also wished him well and told him I'd be willing to talk with him again down the road. Don't think that's going to happen. I probably could have been more forgiving, but I think he appreciated me not bullshitting him by acting like all this crap hasn't affected my wife and me. There was more, but it's less important, and this is too long as it is. After XBIL left, I asked my dad if he, Mom, and I could sit down and talk about all this. I didn't mean immediately, but that's how he took it. He called Mom and let her know I was coming over, so I rolled with it. She was pretty hurt by my sister's plans to ruin her and Dad's relationship with me and my wife, and to use the grandkids as pawns. She cried a lot and wanted to confront them immediately. Dad got her to put a pin in that for a while. Mom was also dumbfounded about me supposedly being the favorite child. She feels like they were actually more strict with me because I had a hard curfew and my sisters didn't. To be honest, I barely remember that. It was 25 years ago. A couple of side notes. Middle sister eventually told our folks she's divorced. She's currently living off child support and her half of the home sale. Supposedly, she's trying to find a job. My parents have gone low contact with both sisters. No idea how permanent that is, but Mom seems like she's completely had it with them for the foreseeable future. They're spending a lot of time at the vacation house. We're up there over a month at one point. XBIL found my Reddit posts. He's not terribly happy about them, but feels they're more or less accurate, though obviously he found them slanted towards my point of view. He disagreed that he's boring, but said to be fair that he finds me boring as well. I can live with that. Our worlds don't have much overlap except my sister. We got the trust set up for my parents' house. I'm the trustee. All this has been emotionally draining for me. I decided it would be a good idea for me to see a therapist again. I've seen one in the past, mainly for stress-related issues. I've been doing so for a while, and it's definitely helpful. Therapist tells me my decision to stay no contact with my siblings is healthy for now, but also wants me to keep an open mind down the road.